to thank you all for coming out here today. My name is James Badham. I'm the leader of the Green Party of Manitoba. I'm a candidate in Fort Garry Riverview. Joined here today by my Wolseley candidate, Dave Nickers. Also have our Charleswood candidate, Kevin Nichols. And we also have Mr. Cardillo, our River Heights candidate. And I think that's who I have here today for candidates with me. But today we want to talk a little bit about the Greens' Climate Action Plan. So a Green government would introduce a comprehensive climate change action plan. The Green Plan would involve investing $166 million a year and counting in measures that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Uncontrolled climate change is too important of a threat for us not to act now. It threatens our existence, but perhaps more importantly, by not addressing climate change, we're missing out on opportunities to create thousands of jobs here in Manitoba. Now, addressing climate change, or getting serious about climate change, starts with putting a price on greenhouse gas emissions. The Green Party of Manitoba is the only party that has clearly came out in favor and said, yes, we want a $50 a ton carbon tax in Manitoba. Other parties have really not taken much of a position one way or the other, although the NDP has since 2007 been a member of the Western Climate Initiative saying they're going to implement cap and trade. We've yet to see it. And not only have we not seen cap and trade implemented, it also is inappropriate for Manitoba. It would only apply to maybe 10% of the emitters in Manitoba, the large emitters. Where is emissions growing in Manitoba? From transportation and agriculture. Those are the sectors that we most need to address first and foremost if we're going to get serious about addressing climate change. So with our $50 a ton carbon tax, we're going to be able to reduce personal income taxes and payroll taxes. This is going to help mitigate the impact of rising energy costs. So about $274 million of their estimated $500 million in revenue would be used to lower the lowest personal income tax bracket from 10.8% to 9.5%. Additional to that, we're going to have $60 million that's going to be put towards reducing the payroll tax in Manitoba. Now, other parties in Manitoba have promised they're going to scrap the payroll tax, but they refuse to show us where the money's going to come from. This won't totally eliminate the payroll tax, but it'll make a sizable dent in it, and we're actually showing how we're going to fund it rather than just vague promises. Now that leaves $166 million per year and counting as the carbon tax increases over time to be implemented towards measures which would help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So we can help Manitobans better insulate their houses. We could help Manitobans buy electric cars. We could convert our bus fleet in Winnipeg to electric buses. We could make urban transit fare-free. There's a number of issues. We could help work. We could reinstate the Manitoba Agricultural Sustainable Practices Program. That itself, the government's own numbers estimate 22 to 36 kilotons per year in reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Implementation of a carbon tax at $50 a ton would be about a 5% decrease in demand for transportation-related fuels. So we could see about 281 kilotons in reductions from that measure alone. Beyond that, if we had more Manitobans driving electric vehicles, let's say 5% of Manitobans are driving electric vehicles, that itself is 281 kilotons of emissions. Those two measures alone could have Manitoba on track to meet its climate action plan. The real difference with the Green Plan is we're actually committing sincere dollars to this. The NDP plan that they released this past December commits $1 million per year. I'll repeat that, $1 million per year. When we spend $400 million per year on our roads, that's simply inadequate. I'm not saying we don't need to invest in our roads, but we need to give climate change the sincerity that it deserves, not only because our planet is in peril, but also because we're missing out on economic opportunities. We're missing out on the thousands of jobs that we could create here in Manitoba. So I think that's a substantial difference from the $1 million offered by the NDP, the $2 million offered by the Liberals, and nothing offered by Brian Pallister and his Conservatives, unsurprisingly. Now let's take a look at what Manitoba has done on climate change. This government likes to talk about us being a green leader, but we have the 5th highest per capita emissions in all of Canada. So we're in the middle of the pack. And other hydro provinces like Quebec and BC have lower per capita emissions than Manitoba. Clearly, we're not doing enough in Manitoba. When emissions are 14% higher than they were in 1990 levels, and when this government has time and time and time again failed to meet their own climate change reduction strategies. We're going back to 2002, then again in 2008, and now we have a new plan right before an election. We see the same pattern. How many times are Manitobans going to be fooled by this government? If you're concerned about climate change, your only option is to vote Green, because only the Greens are treating climate change seriously. So we really feel that by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we can improve the quality of life of all Manitobans. I'm happy to answer any further questions that you have, but I think at the end of the day, that's the takeaway point. If you're concerned about climate change, if you want to create the jobs and opportunities that are there, the thousands of jobs that we could create, numerous studies show by investing in green technologies, we create more jobs per dollar invested than we do by investing in fossil fuel and other extractive industries. So this is the potential for tomorrow.
I just wanted to, this plan sounds somewhat reminiscent of the 2008 Stéphane Dion's green shift idea with the carbon tax, but then you're using that to finance the cuts in payroll and income taxes. I'm wondering how you would answer the criticisms that, in spite of that, we could result in seeing jobs leave, or seeing businesses leaving the province to jurisdictions like Saskatchewan, Ontario, or wherever.
I don't think that's true. I mean, if we have a lower payroll tax, that's going to encourage businesses to come into our jurisdiction. If we have lower personal income taxes, that's going to have, especially at the lowest bracket, that's going to not only have some good poverty reduction measures in terms of helping working families, but also it's going to have an impact on encouraging people to come into this province. I think quite the opposite is true. If our city had fare-free urban transit, how much more appealing is that going to make it to visitors and to people that live in the city as it is? If we had, if we're investing in electric vehicles and we're the leader in that, I think Manitoba Hydro can get a much better price than it's getting on the export market, and probably a much better price than using it to fund the Energy East, using our electricity to power the Energy East pipeline. And not only that, then we have a bunch of electric vehicles here in Manitoba. If we converted our bus fleet to electric buses, who's going to build it? Likely the new Flyer plant out in Transcona. So that's going to be a bunch of jobs. So I don't actually buy that. If we look at the BC example of a carbon tax, their economy actually improved. They actually created more jobs while also reducing emissions at the same time. So I think that's a false straw man argument that people raise. And I think it's, we've heard this from economist after economist after economist. A carbon tax is the best way as a first measure to dealing with greenhouse gas emissions. Yet no political party shows the courage that's required to implement these changes. And I think just a little bit more beyond that, one thing to make a slight slightly distinguish our own plan from the Dion plan. A big difference of ours is keeping that $166 million to fund the infrastructure that we need. So it's about a 2/3 shift with a 1/3 use in infrastructure. And I think that's a smart investment, because if we don't start investing in better insulating our buildings, if we don't start investing in converting our transportation fleet towards electric, if we don't start investing in improving agricultural practices, if we don't start investing in creating proper composting programs, then our emissions are going to continue to rise. So to me, it's just smart investments that'll create long-term jobs.
Do you have specific plans with regard to that $166 million investment? You've mentioned the insulation. You also mentioned agricultural practices. Could you be a little bit more specific about
Sure.
what
Well,
you're going
there's
to
a number of things that we
invest in?
want to do, and we'd be set up to working with Manitobans on that. So I could see a number of grant programs. So to say where exactly every $166 million is going to go, some of that's going to have to be done in consultation with Manitobans, and try to encourage organizations. Say someone wants to better insulate a museum or a school in their community, then they might put in a grant application to this fund. Now, you wanted to talk somewhat about, I referenced the Manitoba Sustainable Agricultural Practices Program. That's actually in the government's climate change plan. It's something that they brag about creating reductions. However, they've defunded this program. It was only a couple million per year, and their own estimates say about 22 to 36 kilotons of reduction per year. So here's a couple $1 million project that has been defunded. The government admits has reduced emissions by 20 to 30 kilotons, give or take, per year, and we can easily come up with a couple million to refund that program. Similarly, we've heard other parties talk about a rebate for electric vehicles. Certainly we're in support of that. They've promised $2 million a year. Once again, we've got $166 million, so we can do that and then some. Our measures on making transit fare-free, we figure that's about $60–70 million a year, and would increase in ridership rates of 30 to 50%, thereby decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. Once again, we've got the money to do that. We want to start buying electric buses. There'd be money left over for that. So to say where every penny is going to be spent, what we'd have to do is a global kind of economic assessment model, make sure that we're getting the largest bang for a buck in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, also probably job creation to a certain extent as well as other community and social benefits. We have to take a holistic look at this, but it would be a matter of implementing it that way. And I gave you a number of examples. The 5% decrease, that just the increase in the price of gasoline would have would be 281 kilotons of reduction. So we can suddenly see a lot of things being achieved. So.
Yeah, I'm wondering also about, there's been a lot of talk lately about the city trying to implement an organic pickup service as a result of the concerns around methane gas being generated in the Brady landfill. I'm wondering if your green plan, your climate plan deals with that and the issues around provincial and working with the city.
Well, I mean, certainly, it is important to recognize the distinction between the city of Winnipeg and the province. However, I have some concerns. I think many Greens do have some concerns about this composting program. It's kind of very much the idea of driving a bunch of trucks around and hauling it out to the dump. I think maybe we could invest more in local communities. Like I know in my riding, in Lord Roberts and Riverview area in particular, lots of good community composting programs going on. Lots of the people are already composting in their backyard. So the idea of charging them $100 for compost pickup when they're already doing it seems unfair to them. And similarly, I know in Dave's riding in Wolseley and West Broadway and a number of ridings. Charleswood's also got some. What a surprise, all the areas that have strong green candidates where they have good community gardening programs. So maybe we want to look at investing in those. Something I didn't mention too, which maybe isn't as Winnipeg-centric, but up north, investing in gardening programs is a great way to both improve food outcomes, but also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I think there's a potential there to work with the city and look for better programs. That said, I think Greens are strongly in support of increasing composting. That's something that this government has promised they would do all along, and they haven't done. And that's something that we have to see. I mean, it's vital that we compost, both in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also in terms of closing the loop on the phosphorus cycle and keeping nutrients out of our waterways. So there's a lot of benefits and reasons why we should be composting.
Yeah, and talking about dealing with the city, I think a major concern is that of transportation. Whether it's, we have a bus rapid transit strategy, but I know a lot of people have argued we need some sort of light rail would be a superior plan. I don't know. Do you have a preference? I know this is sort of like the city jurisdiction, but how do you interact with the city and put together a responsible transportation plan? I mean, it seems to me there's a lot of overlap between a climate plan and a transportation plan for rapid transit for the city.
Once again, it comes back to the $166 million that we have. And that $166 million can be used. I mean, cities have been crying for money in a new funding formula. They want to build composting programs. They want to build bus rapid transit or maybe light rail transit, depending on, who's elected to mayor and city council in the city. But, they need the money to do that. So we have a way to provide the money there. Now, in terms of the consultation with the city, I think it's going to depend on, who's at City Hall at the time and should we form a green government, then we'll have those discussions and those negotiations. And I think we have to work somewhat with the city as to what their plan is. I certainly think that there is some advantages to going LRT over BRT. We also have to be careful to look at the expenses. So it's not an easy answer, and I think rather than focusing on BRT versus LRT, we need to focus constructively on how do we get better mass transit service in Winnipeg in general. Does that mean LRT? Does that mean more buses? Does that mean better service? Does that mean BRT? I think it's not either or, but it's a number of those options together, and I think it's a matter of working with the city and working with the public to implement them.
I got one last question. I know you've talked about the failures of the past government to meet the ambitious climate goals. I'm wondering if there's one or two examples you could point to where the NDP's government may have exacerbated the situation with climate.
Yeah, actually, well, Dave, why don't you answer that? You want to do peat bog mining? There's
peat
one.
bog mining. In this last summer, they ended a 4-year moratorium on peat bog mining, which represents the equivalent of 3% of Manitoba's CO2 emissions. They just upped the CO2 emissions by reintroducing peat bog mining after a 4-year moratorium. That made no sense whatsoever. They shifted it from, mines to conservation. They shifted departments, and there's no reason to re-implement peat bog mining. It's just a small example, but
I can give other examples. So we've put in tax credits for horizontal drilling in largely in southwestern Manitoba, which involves us fracking for oil, and essentially we're seeing large methane, sour gas releases in Manitoba. That's actually cumulatively, it's about 900,000 kilotons, I believe. It's one of the largest emitters in Manitoba Other things that the government has done, I think, in terms of increasing emissions, their ethanol strategy is all wrong. They claim that, you know, the numbers always change, but anywhere from 330,000 to 400,000 in emissions reduction. However, if you look right at the Environment Canada reports, you'll see the Husky plant itself produces 200,000. So the numbers they're giving us aren't accurate numbers, and many people would argue that ethanol production actually produces more emissions than it reduces. So there's an example of a strategy that they constantly point to. This is what we're doing on climate change. This is what we're doing on climate change, but it's not even a very effective strategy. You know, the other thing they haven't really done is they haven't really shown the courage and fortitude to take on transportation. I mean, that's the big one in Manitoba, and it's not easy. I know we all like our cars, and you know, but what I think people need to realize is we convert to electric cars. They're just as convenient. In fact, I got to meet the secretary of the Manitoba Electric Vehicle Association. He spends $7 a month on electricity to power his car. $7 a month. How many of us wouldn't mind to drive a car for $7 a month? You know, getting electric buses, they're more quiet, they're more silent. A lot of people prefer to be on them. So these options aren't going to make the world, you know, worse off. They're going to make us much better off. And I think even more importantly, I think we missed the boat 10 years ago. And it's too bad that we didn't move 10 years ago, but if we move now, we can start capturing these opportunities. And if we wait, we're going to be left behind. We may have already waited too long with this NDP government, and that's why we need Greens in the legislature.
In particular, another issue that's come up is the Energy East pipeline, and the NDP, the Liberals and the Conservatives are all on the same page with Energy East. There may have been individuals who say things differently, but the parties are on board with Energy East. The Green Party of Manitoba is the only party with a policy that opposes Energy East. And that is the equivalent, if you take what's proposed to come through that pipeline, it's much more than the entire emissions of Manitoba every year coming through that pipeline. So facilitating the pipeline like the Selinger government is proposing to do is going to be a mistake, and it needs to be stopped. And that's another issue that the NDP need to come on board with. And not only, of course, we want to form government in the Green Party, but even individuals getting elected to the legislature can change the nature and the tone of the debate on these issues. Nobody mentions fracking in the Manitoba government or in any of the NDP government. They've allowed that to expand over the last several years, and those regulations that they're working under were passed in 1993 and 94. They have no updated regulations with fracking. It's undergone a massive expansion, and like James said, it releases greenhouse gases. It's the wrong way to go for our water supply and our water safety. And again, the Greens' job is to, of course, get elected and of course form government, but we raise the level of debate on these issues, and we force the other parties to come out and be greener in themselves. So we have a greening influence in the political spectrum.
I think Dave's being too modest. I think Dave's ran hard against a candidate right now who's now putting out literature saying that he's going to actively oppose the Energy East, and we've seen another candidate do that as well. I don't think if we didn't have the Green Party nipping at their heels and forcing to hold this government to account, we wouldn't be seeing these reversals. And we really have to ask ourselves, can we trust them? I mean, in 2008, when Gary Dearer passed the Climate Change Emissions Reductions Act, he explicitly said, if our government doesn't meet these reductions, if we don't meet our Kyoto target of 6% below 1990 levels, the people of Manitoba should vote us out of office. Unfortunately, they didn't. How many times can we trust this government to repeatedly make promises that they fail to implement? And that's really, I think, the situation. I think without Greens in the legislature, and whether we're in the legislature or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to keep pushing on these issues. But I think by getting us in the legislature, Manitobans can be more assured that whoever forms the next government, that these issues are going to be front and center, and that someone's actually going to be raising them, and someone's actually going to take climate change seriously. As I said, $1 or $2 million a year to deal with climate change, that doesn't give it the priority that it deserves. 166 million and growing.
Yeah.
That shows a level of sincerity that no other party is putting forward.
I have no other questions.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.